Hey there, spooky friends. Before I dive into today's video, I need to warn you. What you're about to hear isn't just another ghost story pulled from the internet. This is my personal experience, and honestly, I've been struggling with whether I should even share it. Some of what happened during my investigation of the Stanley Hotel, I still can't explain. You know that feeling when the temperature suddenly drops and the hair on the back of your neck stands up? That was me every single night I spent there. But I'm getting ahead of myself. If you're new to my channel, first of all, welcome. If you love real paranormal investigations like this one, make sure to hit that subscribe button and notification bell. Because after what I captured at the Stanley Hotel, well, let's just say you won't want to miss what's coming up next. Let me take you back to last month. I'd finally convinced the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado to let me stay and investigate for 3 nights. Yeah, the Stanley Hotel. The one that freaked Stephen King out so badly he wrote The Shining. Though after what I experienced there, I'd say King barely scratched the surface of how terrifying this place really is. I remember pulling up to the hotel just as the sun was setting behind the Rocky Mountains. The Stanley sits there like this massive white ghost against the mountainside, all Victorian elegance and old world charm. But there's something else about it. Something that hits you the moment you step out of your car. It's like the whole building is watching you. I'd booked room 417, known as one of the most active rooms in the hotel. The woman at the front desk, Sarah, according to her name tag, got real quiet when I told her I was there to investigate the paranormal activity. She'd worked there for 15 years, and I could tell she wanted to say something. Finally, she leaned in close and whispered, "Just be respectful. And if you hear children laughing on the 4th floor at night, don't follow the sound. Trust me on that one." Not gonna lie, my hands were shaking a bit as I unlocked the door to 417. The room itself looked normal enough. Vintage furniture, those old-fashioned radiators that clank and hiss, and a view of the mountains that would have been beautiful if I hadn't been so focused on what might be sharing the space with me. I spent that first afternoon setting up my equipment. EMF meters by the windows and door, thermal camera on the dresser, digital voice recorders in each corner, and my full spectrum camera ready to go. I also set up my laptop to monitor everything. You guys know me. I like to be thorough. Everything was quiet until about 2 a.m. I was reviewing some baseline footage when I heard it. Piano music. Not recorded music playing through speakers, but the unmistakable sound of someone playing a piano somewhere in the hotel. It wasn't just random notes either. This was classical music being played perfectly, like a professional concert pianist was performing. I grabbed my handheld camera and started recording as I followed the sound downstairs. The music got clearer as I approached the concert hall, and I could even identify the piece. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. But here's the thing. It was 2 a.m., and I hadn't seen another soul in hours. The moment I touched the concert hall door handle, the music stopped. Complete silence. I pushed open the door, my camera rolling, and found exactly what I expected. An empty room. But when I walked over to the antique Steinway piano, the bench was pulled out. And the keys, guys, I'm not making this up. The keys were warm to the touch, like someone had just been playing. Back in my room, I couldn't shake what had just happened. I later learned that Flora Stanley, the original owner's wife, was an accomplished pianist. Staff members had told me she loved that piano so much that even death couldn't keep her from playing it. But that was just the beginning of what would turn out to be the most intense night of my paranormal investigation career. Around 3 a.m., my EMF meter started going crazy. Now, I always check for normal electrical sources first. That's just good investigating. But this was different. The readings were moving, literally moving across the room in a straight line. I grabbed my thermal camera, and what I saw, I still get chills thinking about it. A cold spot, about the size and shape of a person, was moving slowly across my room. The temperature in that spot was a good 20 degrees colder than the rest of the room. I started asking questions, using my digital recorder. "Is someone here with me? Can you give me a sign?" That's when the bathroom door slammed shut. Not just closed, slammed. The kind of slam that makes your heart jump into your throat. I spun around with my camera, and that's when I captured something I still can't explain. A figure, just for a split second, reflected in the bathroom mirror. It looked like a man in an old-fashioned suit. I've seen a lot of supposed ghost photos in my time, and I'm usually pretty skeptical. But this was different. The figure was clear as day, just for that split second. I'll be sharing that footage in my next video, by the way. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. After that, things escalated quickly. The temperature in the room dropped so low I could see my breath. My equipment was going haywire. EMF spikes, temperature fluctuations, and my audio recorder was picking up what sounded like whispered conversations, though I couldn't make out the words at the time. That's when I heard it, children laughing. Remember what Sarah at the front desk had warned me about? The sound was coming from somewhere above me, on the 4th floor. It wasn't just one child. It sounded like several of them, playing and running around. I know she told me not to follow the sound, but I'm an investigator. That's what we do. I grabbed my equipment and headed up to the 4th floor. The old service elevator creaked as it carried me up, and with each floor, that feeling of being watched got stronger. The 4th floor was darker than the others, with just a few dim lights casting shadows in the long hallway. The children's laughter had stopped, but as I walked down that corridor, I could hear the distinct sound of footsteps running ahead of me, like they were playing some kind of game. I followed the sounds until I reached the end of the hallway. That's when the temperature dropped again, and my camera battery, which had been fully charged, suddenly died. In fact, all my equipment shut down at once. Complete equipment failure. That had never happened before in all my years of investigating. Standing there in the dark, I heard a child whisper right next to my ear, "Want to play?" I'm not ashamed to tell you, I ran. I ran all the way back to my room, and I didn't stop until I was safely inside with the door locked. Back in my room, I tried to calm down and make sense of what had just happened. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely change the batteries in my equipment. But here's the thing about being a paranormal investigator. Sometimes the most compelling evidence comes right after the scariest moments. When I finally got my nerve back, I started reviewing the footage I'd captured before everything shut down, and that's when I noticed something I'd completely missed in the moment. In the thermal footage, you can clearly see small heat signatures about the size of children moving along the hallway just ahead of me. The next morning, I did some research about the 4th floor. Turns out, back in the hotel's early days, this was where all the children would stay with their nannies while their wealthy parents socialized downstairs. Staff members have reported hearing children playing up there for decades, but what I captured on my thermal camera, that was different. That was proof. I tried to get some sleep after sunrise, but every time I dozed off, I'd hear something that would jerk me awake. Footsteps in my room, whispered conversations, the sound of furniture moving. By the way, if you're enjoying this investigation so far, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps the channel and lets me know you want more content like this. That evening, I decided to investigate the billiard room. According to the hotel staff, F.O. Stanley himself is often seen there, still keeping an eye on his beloved hotel. I set up my equipment just as the sun was setting and settled in for what would become the most intense paranormal encounter of my life. The billiard room looks exactly like it did in the early 1900s. Same furniture, same fixtures, even the same billiard tables. I started my EVP session, asking questions into the quiet room. "Mr. Stanley, are you here? Can you give us a sign of your presence?" At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the temperature began to drop. I watched the thermal camera as a cold spot formed near one of the billiard tables. The spot was human-shaped, about 6 feet tall, and it was moving. Not randomly, but with purpose. Exactly like someone lining up a shot on the billiard table. That's when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of a billiard ball rolling across the table. But I could see the table clearly. There were no balls on it. The sound moved from one end to the other, followed by what sounded like someone chuckling quietly. My EMF meter lit up like a Christmas tree, and the energy seemed to be circling around me. The air got so cold I could see my breath, and that's when I smelled it. Cigar smoke. F.O. Stanley was known for enjoying his cigars in the billiard room, and the smell was unmistakable. I started asking more questions. "Mr. Stanley, did you just make that ball roll? Can you do it again?" The response I got, well, it's still hard to talk about. A voice, clear as day, came through my audio recorder. "This is my house." 3 words that made every hair on my body stand on end. I checked my audio recorder right away, something I almost never do during an active investigation. But I had to know if I'd really captured that voice. When I played back the recording, not only was the voice there, but it was followed by something else. What sounded like multiple people having a conversation at a party, complete with the clinking of glasses and distant laughter. The weird thing is, I hadn't heard any of that in the moment, just the 3 words. But there it was on my recorder. A full 30 seconds of what sounded like a party from the hotel's heyday, crystal clear, as if it was happening right then. My hands were shaking as I set up my spirit box. For those new to paranormal investigation, a spirit box sweeps through radio frequencies rapidly, theoretically allowing spirits to communicate through the white noise. I almost never get clear responses on it, but this time was different. "Welcome to my hotel," came through clearly. Then, "Stay, join us." Each response was perfectly clear, not broken up like usual spirit box responses. I asked if I could take a picture, and immediately heard "stand still." I raised my camera with trembling hands. When I reviewed the photo later, I couldn't believe what I saw. There, standing behind the billiard table, was the clear outline of a man in early 1900s clothing. He was semi-transparent, but you could make out every detail. His suit, his mustache, even the cigar in his hand. It's the clearest apparition I've ever captured on camera. The activity continued for almost 2 hours. Billiard balls moving on their own, footsteps crossing the room, more EVPs coming through my recorder. It was like Mr. Stanley had decided to give me the full tour of his spiritual home. But the most compelling evidence came near the end of my session. I'd been asking about the hotel's history, and suddenly, the temperature dropped dramatically. The cold spot moved toward my camera, and for a brief moment my viewfinder showed a face. Not just a blur or an orb, but a clear, detailed face of a man I later identified as F.O. Stanley himself from historical photos. I spent my final night at the Stanley in room 217, the same room that inspired Stephen King to write The Shining. What happened in that room? Well, that's a story for another video. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it, because the evidence I captured there makes everything I've just told you seem tame in comparison. I've investigated hundreds of haunted locations over the years, but the Stanley Hotel is different. It's not just random paranormal activity. It's like the entire building is alive with the spirits of its past. The Stanleys never left their beloved hotel, and they're not shy about letting guests know they're still there. Before I wrap up this video, I want to share one final piece of evidence with you. Remember that first night when I heard the piano playing? Well, when I analyzed my audio recordings later, I found something incredible. Behind the piano music, you can hear a woman's voice humming along. According to hotel historians, Flora Stanley used to do exactly that while she practiced. After my investigation at the Stanley Hotel, I thought I'd seen it all. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for what I experienced at the Crescent Hotel in Eureka Springs, Arkansas. What happened there haunts me in a way that's different from any other investigation I've ever done. This isn't just about things going bump in the night. This is about coming face to face with real darkness. Before I continue, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, now is the time to hit that button. Because what I'm about to share with you, well, let's just say this investigation changed everything I thought I knew about paranormal research. The Crescent Hotel is known as America's most haunted hotel, and after spending 3 nights there, I understand why. But to really grasp what makes this place so terrifying, you need to know its history. Most haunted hotels have maybe one or two tragic events in their past. The Crescent is like a layer cake of tragedy. Built in 1886 as a luxury resort, it first became a hospital, but not just any hospital. In 1937, a man named Norman Baker turned it into what he called a cancer treatment center. Baker wasn't a doctor. He wasn't even a trained medical professional. He was a con man who promised desperate people he could cure their cancer, took their life savings, and left them to die. I arrived at the Crescent on a cold October afternoon. The building sits on top of a hill, looming over Eureka Springs, like some kind of Gothic castle. The moment I pulled into the parking lot, my equipment started acting up. My fully charged camera battery suddenly died, and my EMF meter was already picking up unusual readings. Walking through those front doors felt like stepping into another time. The lobby still has its original Victorian grandeur, but there's something else there, too. A heaviness in the air that makes it hard to breathe. The check-in clerk, an older woman named Margaret, must have noticed my equipment because she immediately asked if I was there to investigate. Room 419, she said, handing me the key. That's Theodora's room. She doesn't like people messing with her things. She paused, then added in a lower voice, "And whatever you do, don't go into the basement alone. Some things down there, they're better left undisturbed." I'd requested room 419 specifically because it's known as one of the most active rooms in the hotel. Theodora was one of Norman Baker's patients who died there, and according to staff and guests, she never left. People report their belongings being moved around, seeing a woman in white sitting in the corner chair, and feeling someone sit on the edge of their bed at night. Setting up my equipment in 419 felt different from other investigations. My cameras kept turning off, the EMF meter would spike for no reason, and I had to replace my digital recorder batteries 3 times in the first hour alone. It was like something was draining all the energy from my devices. As the sun set, I started my first EVP session. "Theodora, are you here? I'd like to talk to you." The response I got on my digital recorder still gives me chills. A woman's voice, clear as day, whispered, "This is my room." But what happened next? That's when things got really intense. The temperature in the room dropped suddenly. I could see my breath in the air. The corner chair, Theodora's favorite spot, creaked like someone had just sat down. I aimed my thermal camera at it and couldn't believe what I was seeing. There was a perfect human-shaped heat signature sitting there, but the chair was empty. After my investigation at the Stanley Hotel, I thought I'd seen it all. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for what I experienced at the Crescent Hotel in Eureka Springs, Arkansas. What happened there haunts me in a way that's different from any other investigation I've ever done. This isn't just about things going bump in the night. This is about coming face to face with real darkness. Before I continue, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, now is the time to hit that button. Because what I'm about to share with you, well, let's just say this investigation changed everything I thought I knew about paranormal research. The Crescent Hotel is known as America's most haunted hotel, and after spending 3 nights there, I understand why. But to really grasp what makes this place so terrifying, you need to know its history. Most haunted hotels have maybe 1 or 2 tragic events in their past. The Crescent is like a layer cake of tragedy. Built in 1886 as a luxury resort, it first became a hospital, but not just any hospital. In 1937, a man named Norman Baker turned it into what he called a cancer treatment center. Baker wasn't a doctor. He wasn't even a trained medical professional. He was a con man who promised desperate people he could cure their cancer, took their life savings, and left them to die. I arrived at the Crescent on a cold October afternoon. The building sits on top of a hill, looming over Eureka Springs, like some kind of Gothic castle. The moment I pulled into the parking lot, my equipment started acting up. My fully charged camera battery suddenly died, and my EMF meter was already picking up unusual readings. Walking through those front doors felt like stepping into another time. The lobby still has its original Victorian grandeur, but there's something else there too. A heaviness in the air that makes it hard to breathe. The check-in clerk, an older woman named Margaret, must have noticed my equipment because she immediately asked if I was there to investigate. Room 419, she said, handing me the key. That's Theodora's room. She doesn't like people messing with her things. She paused, then added in a lower voice, "And whatever you do, don't go into the basement alone. Some things down there, they're better left undisturbed." I'd requested room 419 specifically because it's known as one of the most active rooms in the hotel. Theodora was one of Norman Baker's patients who died there, and according to staff and guests, she never left. People report their belongings being moved around, seeing a woman in white sitting in the corner chair, and feeling someone sit on the edge of their bed at night. Setting up my equipment in 419 felt different from other investigations. My cameras kept turning off, the EMF meter would spike for no reason, and I had to replace my digital recorder batteries 3 times in the first hour alone. It was like something was draining all the energy from my devices. As the sun set, I started my first EVP session. "Theodora, are you here? I'd like to talk to you." The response I got on my digital recorder still gives me chills. A woman's voice, clear as day, whispered, "This is my room." But what happened next? That's when things got really intense. The temperature in the room dropped suddenly. I could see my breath in the air. The corner chair, Theodora's favorite spot, creaked like someone had just sat down. I aimed my thermal camera at it and couldn't believe what I was seeing. There was a perfect human-shaped heat signature sitting there, but the chair was empty. I started asking more questions, and with each one, the activity increased. The bathroom door would open and close by itself. Items on the dresser would move slightly, like someone was touching them. And through it all, my digital recorder kept picking up that same woman's voice, sometimes answering my questions, sometimes just humming to herself. But the most compelling evidence came around 3 a.m. I'd been reviewing some footage on my laptop when I heard what sounded like someone crying in the hallway. When I opened my door to investigate, I saw a woman in a white nightgown at the end of the hall. She turned and looked right at me, then walked through the wall. I ran back into my room to grab my camera, but by the time I got back to the hallway, she was gone. The weird thing is, when I checked my footage later, I realized my body cam had been recording the whole time. And there she was, a full-bodied apparition, clear as day, walking through that wall. In all my years of investigating, I'd never captured anything like it, but that was just the beginning. The next day, I interviewed some of the hotel staff, and what they told me, well, it made me seriously question whether I should continue the investigation. One housekeeper, Maria, had been working there for 20 years. She told me about the morgue in the basement. During Norman Baker's time, she said, that's where he stored the bodies. They found bottles down there, filled with human tissue samples. He kept them as proof of his cures. Sometimes at night, we can still hear screaming coming from down there. I knew I had to investigate the basement, but something kept telling me to wait until my final night. Looking back, maybe that was Theodora trying to protect me. Because what happened when I finally did go down there, it's the reason I couldn't sleep for weeks after leaving the Crescent. Before heading to the basement that last night, I decided to do another EVP session in 419. That's when something unprecedented happened. I set up my spirit box, and instead of the usual broken fragments of speech, I got full, clear sentences. A woman's voice, Theodora's voice, came through. Don't go down there. He's still there. He's waiting. I asked who she meant, and the response sent chills down my spine. Baker. He never left. He's collecting souls. The temperature dropped so low that frost actually formed on my camera lens. Every piece of equipment I had was going off at once. It was like Theodora was trying desperately to warn me. But I'm an investigator. It's my job to document these things. No matter how terrifying they might be. So at midnight, I grabbed my equipment and headed down to the basement. If you're enjoying this investigation so far, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, what happened next, you won't want to miss it. The basement of the Crescent Hotel feels like a different world. The temperature drops about 20 degrees the moment you step off the elevator. The walls are rough-cut stone, and the corridors twist and turn like a maze. But the worst part is the morgue. It's still there, exactly as it was in Baker's day. The morgue itself is a small room with stone walls and a concrete floor. The autopsy table is still there, its rusted metal surface a reminder of all the suffering that happened here. And those bottles Maria mentioned? They're displayed in a small case, a grim reminder of Baker's treatments. I set up my equipment, EMF meters, motion sensors, thermal camera, and multiple digital recorders. The activity started almost immediately. My EMF meters were lighting up like crazy, moving in patterns across the room as if someone was pacing back and forth. The first EVP I captured down there still haunts me. A man's voice, angry and clear. "Get out of my hospital." I asked if it was Norman Baker. The temperature dropped so suddenly that my breath clouded in front of my face. And that's when I heard the bottles in the display case start to rattle. One by one, they began to shake, like something was trying to get out. Through my camera's viewfinder, I could see dark shapes moving between the bottles. Not orbs, but something more solid. That's when my thermal camera picked up a full figure standing in the corner. It was human-shaped, but the temperature reading was impossible, nearly 20 degrees below the ambient room temperature. It stayed there, perfectly still, watching me. Then it moved, walking straight toward my camera. Every piece of equipment I had went dead simultaneously. Complete darkness. In that pitch-black moment, I heard footsteps, not echoes or distant sounds. Clear footsteps on the concrete floor circling around me. Then I felt it. A cold hand on my shoulder. Not the kind of cold spot we usually experience during investigations. This was a physical touch, like ice pressing through my shirt. I fumbled for my flashlight, and when I finally got it working, what I saw in its beam, I still have nightmares about it. Standing there, not 3 feet away, was a man in a white doctor's coat, covered in dark stains. He smiled at me, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was Baker's smile, the same one I'd seen in his photographs upstairs. The figure raised its hand, pointing at the autopsy table. That's when the screaming started. It wasn't just one voice. It was many voices, all screaming at once. The sound filled the morgue, echoing off the stone walls. Through my camera's night vision, I could see multiple figures appearing and disappearing around the room. My camera was still recording, capturing everything, even though my other equipment remained dead. Through the viewfinder, I could see more figures emerging from the walls. Patients in hospital gowns, their bodies showing the signs of Baker's brutal treatments. They formed a circle around me, their faces twisted in pain and anger. Then Baker's apparition spoke. Not through my equipment this time. I heard his voice clear as day. They all trusted me, just like you trust your eyes right now. The temperature dropped even lower, and that's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Looking through my camera, I could see my own breath, but the spirits around me, they weren't breathing at all. The autopsy table started to vibrate, then lift off the ground. It rose about 3 feet in the air and just hung there. The spirits were getting closer, their forms becoming more solid. I could smell it now, a mixture of formaldehyde and decay that made my stomach turn. That's when I heard Theodora's voice cutting through the chaos. "Run!" I didn't think twice. I turned and sprinted for the door, but it slammed shut before I could reach it. The handle was ice cold and wouldn't turn. Behind me, Baker's laughter echoed off the walls. I pressed my back against the door, camera still rolling, as the spirits closed in. Through the viewfinder, I could see their faces clearly now. Men, women, even children, all victims of Baker's false promises. But but their expressions had changed. They weren't angry anymore. They looked concerned. One of them, a young woman in a bloody hospital gown, reached out toward me. Her hand passed through my camera, and suddenly the screen went white. When the picture came back, everything had changed. I wasn't seeing the morgue anymore. I was seeing what it looked like in Baker's time. The scene playing out on my camera screen was like a window to the past. I could see Baker performing his fake surgeries, hear the screams of his patients, watch as he bottled their tissue samples while they were still alive. It was like the spirits wanted me to witness their stories, to understand what really happened here. Through my camera screen, I watched decades of horror unfold in minutes. Baker's victims showed me everything. The fake treatments, the stolen money, the bodies secretly removed in the middle of the night. But worst of all, they showed me how he kept operating even after he knew his cure was killing people. Suddenly my camera screen went black. When it came back on, I was looking at the morgue again, but something was different. The spirits of Baker's victims had formed a tight circle around his apparition. The temperature in the room plunged so low that ice crystals started forming on my lens. That's when I witnessed something I've never seen in any investigation before. The victims' spirits began moving in unison, their forms merging together into a bright light that filled the room. Baker's apparition tried to back away, but they had him surrounded. His figure began to distort, like static on an old TV. The door behind me suddenly swung open, nearly causing me to fall backward. Theodora's voice came through clearly. "Go now. We'll hold him here." I didn't need to be told twice. I ran out of that basement so fast I nearly dropped my camera. Theodora's voice following me. "Tell our story. Make them remember." When I finally made it back to room 419, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely plug in my camera to review the footage. What I captured in that basement, it's the most compelling evidence I've ever recorded. But here's the thing. The video only shows part of what happened. The next morning, I talked to the hotel staff about what happened. That's when I learned something that made everything even creepier. According to the night manager, every single guest on the lower floors reported having the same nightmare at exactly 3:33 a.m. They all dreamed about being patients in Baker's hospital. But the strangest thing happened when I was checking out. Margaret, the clerk who'd warned me about the basement, handed me an old photograph she said had been found in their archives that morning. It showed Norman Baker with his staff in 1938, but there, in the background, barely visible, was my camera. I've investigated hundreds of locations, but the Crescent Hotel is different. It's not just haunted, it's a place where the veil between past and present is tissue thin. The spirits there aren't just replaying past events. They're actively trying to communicate, to warn people, to make sure their stories aren't forgotten. I spent my final hours at the Crescent reviewing all my evidence. The footage from the basement was unlike anything I'd ever captured. Full apparitions, multiple EVPs, and that incredible moment when the spirits united against Baker. But it's what I discovered in the audio that really shook me. When I cleaned up the audio from my digital recorder, beneath the chaos in the basement, I could hear conversations, hundreds of them. Patients talking about their families, their hopes for Baker's cure, their last moments. It was like the walls of the morgue had absorbed every word spoken there. One EVP in particular stands out. A woman's voice, crystal clear. We couldn't stop him then, but we can protect them now. After hearing that, I went back through the hotel's recent history. In the past 50 years, every time someone had tried to renovate the basement or move the artifacts, they'd experienced terrifying phenomena until they gave up. Before I left, I did one final EVP session in room 419. I wanted to thank Theodora for warning me about the basement. What I got in response was incredible. Her voice came through my spirit box in full, clear sentences. "We all protect each other here, the living and the dead. Don't worry about Baker anymore. He's the one trapped now." That's when my camera captured one last incredible moment. A soft white mist formed in the corner of the room, slowly taking the shape of a woman in a 1930s dress. She smiled, nodded once, and then faded away. But she left something behind. On the bed was a single rose, which Margaret later told me was Theodora's favorite flower. I've had 2 months to process what happened at the Crescent Hotel, and I'm still finding new evidence in my recordings. If you look in the background of some of the footage, you can see patients walking through walls, nurses going about their rounds, and sometimes, just sometimes, you can see Theodora watching over them all. The Crescent Hotel isn't just America's most haunted hotel. It's a place where the past and present exist simultaneously. The spirits there aren't trying to scare anyone. They're trying to make sure their stories aren't forgotten, that Baker's crimes aren't erased by time. If you're ever in Eureka Springs, the Crescent Hotel offers tours of the basement. But be warned, the spirits know the difference between curious visitors and serious investigators. And if you're thinking of staying in room 419, don't be surprised if your belongings get rearranged. Theodora is still very particular about how her room is kept. Before I wrap up this video, I want to share something with you all. Last week, I received a package from the Crescent Hotel. Inside was one of Baker's original medical bags, found hidden in a wall during recent renovations. The staff thought I should have it after what happened in the basement. But here's the thing. Every time I try to open it, my equipment malfunctions, and I smell roses. I think some things are better left unopened. If you found this investigation as incredible as I did, make sure to hit that subscribe button and notification bell. Next week, I'm taking you to the Queen Mary. And let me tell you, what I experienced there gives even the Crescent Hotel a run for its money. Drop a comment below if you've ever experienced anything paranormal in a historic hotel. I read every comment, and your stories help me choose where to investigate next. Stay spooky, everyone. And remember, sometimes the most haunting stories are the ones that history tried to forget.